The desert sun hammered down on the canyon, heat rising in wavering sheets off the red stone. Thorn Kessler, a young drifter not yet past 23, rode steady along the dry trail when a sound cut through the stillness. Screams. Not laughter, not joy. Raw, desperate fear. His pulse kicked hard in his chest as he pulled his horse to a stop, listening sharp. The cries carried from beyond a jagged rise. Thorn didn't hesitate. He drove his heels in and sent his horse charging uphill toward the noise. The sight that met him at the crest turned his blood to ice. 3 women from Helona's circle were running for their lives across the open valley. Behind them thundered a pack of ashen howlers, riding hard, their war cries bouncing off the canyon walls like thunder. Thorn had seen this kind of hunt before. Long-standing grudges between tribes turned mercy into a rare thing. Those women weren't being chased. They were being claimed. If the ashen howlers caught them, it wouldn't end clean. They'd be taken, broken, or worse, left to vanish in the wild like they never existed. Thorn didn't weigh it. There was nothing to consider. No plan, no time. Just action. He pushed his horse downhill at full speed, dust bursting behind him in a golden plume. The 3 women spotted him, and for a split second their fear sharpened. Another rider, another threat. But Thorn lifted his hand high, open, calling out in the broken tongue he knew. "Friends, I ain't your enemy. Come on!" The tallest of them, dark hair braided with turquoise, caught his meaning first. She barked something quick to the others. Thorn swung his horse in close. No introductions, no hesitation. She leapt up behind him with practiced ease. The other 2 turned and sprinted. The ashen howlers were closing fast, less than 100 yards now. "East, to the rocks!" Thorn shouted, pointing. They ran, and Thorn wheeled his horse wide, circling hard with the woman gripping tight behind him, drawing the hunters off their trail. It worked. 5 riders broke away, charging straight for him. His horse was powerful, bred and raised under his hand, but now it carried double weight. He could feel the strain in every stride, the loss of speed inch by inch. Behind him, the pounding of hooves grew louder. The canyon swallowed sound, turning it into a storm. Still, ahead, the land shifted, the stone rising into towering formations carved by time itself. The other 2 women had made it there. Thorn knew this ground. He'd tracked through it before. There was a way in, a narrow cut only a few would dare. He steered straight for it, brushing so close to the rock that the woman behind him nearly scraped against it. The ashen howlers roared in frustration. 2 tried to follow, but their mounts were too large. They slammed against the stone and had to pull back. Thorn pressed on, weaving through the twisting passage as it tightened like a funnel. Then, dead end. The other 2 women waited there, pressed against the stone, fear and hope tangled in their eyes. Thorn swung down from the saddle. The woman behind him followed. For a moment, all 4 stood in silence, measuring one another. Then he saw them clearly. Each one carried her own kind of strength, the tall one with turquoise beads. Her eyes were deep, unflinching, like they could read straight through a man. The second stood grounded and strong, her frame built for survival, hands shaped by work and hardship. The third, youngest, held a quiet softness, though the faint scar on her cheek spoke of trials she'd already faced. Outside, the ashen howlers circled, searching for another way in. Thorn exhaled slowly. They'd find it, sooner or later. But he knew something they didn't. "You're standing on Helona's circle land now," he said low, pointing toward the distant northern ridges. "If you make it there, you live." The woman with the turquoise beads gave a sharp nod, speaking quickly in her tongue. The others straightened, Ready. Then she turned back to him, her voice rough but clear in broken Spanish. "Thank you. Cowboy," she said, her voice steady despite the danger closing in. "I am Helona. They my sisters." She gestured first to the strong-built woman. "Bidziel." Then to the youngest. "Ayana." "Thorn Kessler," he answered, tipping his hat low. "And don't thank me yet. We ain't out of this." The shouts of the ashen howlers were getting louder. They were closing in, finding the path. Thorn's mind raced. His horse couldn't carry 4 people. Not with that kind of speed, not with death riding right behind them. They needed something else. His eyes lifted, scanning the towering stone around them. Ledges, cracks, narrow holds carved by time itself. A risky thought sparked. "You girls climb?" he asked, nodding upward. They followed his gaze and didn't hesitate. Of course they could. They were circle people. These cliffs were as familiar to them as breath. "Then climb," Thorn said quickly. "I'll draw 'em off. I'll lead 'em away from here. Once it's quiet, you come down and head north. Don't stop. Not for anything. You keep moving till you hit Helona's circle land." Helona didn't move right away. She studied him, her dark eyes searching his face. Something flickered there. Something deeper than fear. Something he couldn't quite name. "Why?" she asked softly. "You not one of us?" Thorn gave a small shrug, like the answer didn't carry weight. "Because it's the right thing to do." He didn't wait for more. He swung back into the saddle in one smooth motion. Behind him the women were already climbing, moving across the stone like shadows. Swift, silent, natural. Within seconds, they vanished into the high crevices, swallowed by the canyon. Thorn drew in a breath, muttered a quiet prayer under his breath, then kicked his horse forward. Hard. He burst out from hiding, making sure they heard him. The ashen howlers saw him instantly. A shout went up, sharp, eager. The prey had stepped back into the open. What followed was a chase carved straight out of hell. Thorn rode like the wind itself was chasing him, through tight canyon cuts and wide, open flats. He leapt dry creek beds, cut between towering cacti, pushed his horse harder than he ever had before. Behind him, the pounding thunder of hooves never faded. They were close. Too close. He could almost hear their breath, but Thorn knew this land better than any man alive. He twisted through it, doubled back, crossed bare rock where tracks vanished, led them into false trails and empty turns. Slowly, carefully, he pulled them farther south, deeper into country they didn't know. Time stretched thin, the sun dipped low, bleeding red across the horizon. Then he saw it. A narrow gorge, tight and sharp, leading into a maze of canyons only a few could navigate. He didn't slow down. He plunged into it. The ashen howlers followed. Inside, the world changed. Turns came fast. Shadows swallowed the path. Stone walls rose like traps on either side. But Thorn knew every twist, every hidden split. Within minutes, they were gone. Vanished. He rode on a little farther before finally pulling his horse into a small, hidden cave, tucked between the rocks. He slid down from the saddle, legs trembling with the strain. His heart hammered like a war drum in his chest. The horse stood heaving, foam at its mouth, sides rising and falling hard. But they were alive. And more than that, the women were safe. Thorn leaned back against the cool stone, closing his eyes for just a moment. He had no way of knowing what he'd just set into motion. No way of knowing that 10 years down the line, those same 3 women would come searching for him again. No way of knowing that one day he'd be forced to make the hardest choice of his life. Right then, all he knew was simple. He had done what was right, and sometimes that had to be enough. The wind rolled soft across the plains of New Mexico as Thorne Kessler drove another post deep into the dry earth of his ranch. Late afternoon painted the sky in streaks of fire, orange, red, fading into dusk. Long shadows stretched across the land. He paused, pulling off his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. 33 now. Still strong. Still standing. But some days, it felt like he'd lived 2 different lives. One filled with danger, dust, and running. The other, this one, quiet, isolated, built on hard work and long, empty nights. The ranch wasn't much, a few acres of stubborn land, enough horses to trade, enough crops to scrape by. The house stood small but solid, built with his own hands, wood and stone, every beam carrying his weight. Inside, there was a working stove, a decent bed, and a table. A table where he sat every night. Alone. The nearest folks to Thorne Kessler's land were the Brigg family, living about a couple miles east. Garrick Brigg, his wife Morel Voss, their young girl Elira Voss, barely 8, and old Dela Crowe shared a spread not much different from his own. Thorne would ride over now and then, and they'd return the visit just the same. Still, he kept his distance most days. Not because he didn't care for people, but because he'd learned early on that getting close meant something else, too. Losing them. He'd buried that lesson young. At 12, fever took Eamon Kessler and Lenora Kessler within weeks of each other. A year later, it came back and took his little sister, Vea Kessler. After that, Thorne drifted, ranch to ranch, job to job, never staying long enough for anything to take root. Standing still hurt too much. But now, at 33, the running had worn thin. He wanted something steady, something that would last. A place to call his own. Only problem was, that place felt hollow. He was driving the last nail into a fence post when the sound of hooves came tearing across the plains. Fast. Too fast. Thorne looked up. Elira Voss was racing straight for him on her pony, hair whipping wild behind her like a dark banner in the wind. His gut tightened. She never rode like that unless something had gone real wrong. "Mr. Kessler! Mr. Kessler!" she cried, voice breaking, tears streaking her dust-covered face. Thorne dropped the hammer where he stood and ran to meet her. The pony skidded to a stop, barely under control. "It's Dela!" Elira gasped. "Men came, they took her!" For a second, the world went still. "What men?" Thorne demanded. "Where's your folks?" "Men with bandanas," she sobbed. "They came for our horses. Papa told them no, and they got mad. They took Dela. Said if we don't give them everything by tomorrow, they'll take her far away. We'll never see her again." Her voice cracked. "Mama and Papa, they don't know what to do." A slow burn rose in Thorne's chest, turning hot and sharp. Cowards, the kind that preyed on families who couldn't fight back. He grabbed the reins of her pony and helped her down steady. "Elira, listen close," he said, voice firm but calm. "Did you see which way they went?" She nodded, wiping her cheeks with the back of her sleeve. "Toward the western hills. I saw dust that way." "How many?" "4, maybe 5. I'm not sure." Thorne gave a short nod. "That's all right. You did good, kid. Real good." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "What are you going to do?" He met her gaze, steady as stone. "I'm bringing her back." Something in his voice settled her. The fear didn't vanish, but hope pushed through it. He moved fast, saddled his horse in record time, grabbed his rifle, hoping he wouldn't need it, took his lasso, his canteen, and just enough supplies to get through the night. Less than 5 minutes later, he was riding hard toward the western hills, the sun already slipping low behind the horizon. The trail was easy to read. 5 horses, moving slow, confident. They didn't expect trouble until morning, figured the Brigg family would cave and hand everything over. That was their mistake. Thorn had the edge now. Surprise. He rode for nearly an hour, tracking them across dry flats and broken stone. The light was fading fast, but he knew this country like the lines in his palm. He'd hunted here, bled here, lived here long enough to read it like a map. Then, there it was, a faint glow ahead. Firelight, tucked inside a narrow cut of canyon. Thorn slid off his horse and tied it to a thick brush. From there he moved on foot, silent, careful, every step placed like the trackers who'd taught him years ago. He crouched behind a slab of rock and looked down into the camp. 5 men, just like Elira said. They sat around the fire, laughing, eating like they didn't have a care in the world. Off to the side, tied to a stunted tree, Dela Crowe. 70 years old, and still sitting straight, eyes sharp with defiance. Thorn felt a flicker of respect for her. Then his mind shifted. He couldn't rush in shooting. 5 against 1, and they might hurt her the second things turned bad. No, he needed to be smarter than them, faster than them. He waited. Let the night settle deep. The men passed a bottle around, voices growing louder, looser. Thorn allowed himself a faint smile. Yeah, this would work. He slipped around the edge of camp toward where their horses were tied. One by one, quiet as a ghost. He cut the ropes. The horses stirred, uneasy, then began drifting off into the dark. Thorn gave them a soft push, sending them scattering in different directions. Then he picked up a heavy stone, took aim, and hurled it far across the canyon. It slammed into the rocks with a thunder crack. Every man at the fire jumped to his feet, hands flying to their guns. "What the hell was that?" one barked. "Go check it out, you fools!" the man in charge barked, Varric Holt's voice cutting sharp through the night. 3 of the Holt riders rushed toward the noise, leaving only 2 behind by the fire. Thorn Kessler moved. Not fast. Silent, like a shadow slipping through the dark. He came up behind the first man and swung the butt of his rifle hard against the back of his skull. The bandit dropped without a sound, crumpling into the dust. The second one turned, just in time to see Thorn closing in. They collided. Struggled. But Thorn was quicker. Stronger. Driven by something colder than fear. Within seconds, the man hit the ground, out cold beside his partner. Thorn didn't waste a breath. He rushed straight to Dela Crowe, cutting through the ropes binding her wrists. "You're all right, ma'am," he said low. She gave a small nod, eyes sharp even now, shining with gratitude. "I knew you'd come, boy." "We gotta move," Thorn murmured. "Now. The rest'll be back any second." But before they could take 2 steps, shouts tore through the canyon. The others had returned. They saw their men down. "There! Over there!" one of the Holt riders roared, pointing straight at them. Thorn grabbed Dela's hand. "Run!" he said, firm and urgent. "Run for my horse! It's behind that rock! Go!" She didn't argue, didn't hesitate. For a woman her age, she moved fast, vanishing into the dark. Thorn turned back and held the line. The 3 men charged him, fury in their eyes. What came next was something he'd never forget. The first man swung wild. Thorn slipped it. Another punch. He ducked again. Years in the saddle had made him fast, made his body react before thought could catch up. He blocked the next strike and answered with one clean shot to the jaw. The man dropped hard. The other 2 faltered for half a second. That was all Thorn needed. His hand flew to his belt. lasso already spinning before they could react. He threw. Perfect. The rope snapped tight around one man's legs. Thorne yanked hard. The bandit crashed face first into the dirt. The last one pulled a knife, lunging forward. Too slow. Thorne kicked his wrist. Steel flew into the darkness. Before the man could recover, the rifle came down again. Silence. All 5 men lay scattered across the canyon floor. Thorne stood there a moment, chest rising and falling heavy, dust clinging to his skin. Then he moved, quickly tying them up with their own ropes. Tight, clean, no mistakes. By the time he finished, the fight was over. Dela Crowe watched him from horseback, something like awe in her eyes. As they rode back beneath the pale wash of moonlight, she spoke softly. "You're a good man, Thorne Kessler." He said nothing. "Someday," she continued, voice calm and certain, "someone's going to see that in you, and they'll hold on to it." Thorne kept his eyes ahead. He didn't answer. Didn't believe it. Not yet. He had no way of knowing those words would come true, or that the one who would see his worth had never forgotten him in the first place. When they reached the Brigg Ranch, everything broke loose at once. Elira ran forward, throwing herself into Dela's arms. Morel Voss followed, tears spilling freely, while Garrick Brigg stood close behind, relief written deep across his face. Gratitude poured out in every direction. Offers of money, horses, anything. Thorne shook his head. "Neighbors look after each other," was all he said. Then he turned his horse and rode back into the quiet, back to the emptiness he knew too well, unaware that everything was about to change. Days later, Thorne was working the corral fence when he caught sight of dust rising along the road. He straightened, narrowing his eyes against the morning sun. 3 riders, coming slow, deliberate. He wasn't expecting anyone. As they drew closer, something felt off. They didn't ride like cowboys. Their posture was different, upright, balanced, natural, like they belonged in the saddle, not just passing through it. And their shapes. Women. Thorne felt his heartbeat shift, though he couldn't say why. Then they came close enough, and time stopped. It was them. The 3 women from Halona's circle, the ones he had pulled out of death 10 years ago, but they weren't the same, not even close. Gone were the frightened girls running for their lives. In their place stood women, strong, composed, undeniable. Halona stepped forward first. She wore buckskin, finely worked with patterns that told stories in thread and bead. Her dark hair fell in long braids, woven with feathers and stone. And her eyes, still sharp, still piercing. But now, there was something more. Depth, wisdom, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. And when she looked at Thorne Kessler, it felt like she'd never stopped seeing him. Bidziel stood just behind her. Strong, grounded, dressed for the land itself. Leather pants, a worn buckskin shirt, and a finely carved bow resting across her back. There was no doubt in the way she carried herself. She moved like a warrior, steady and unshaken, her eyes locked forward with fearless clarity. Ayanna, the youngest, had changed in a different way. She had grown into a quiet kind of beauty, soft but not fragile. Her dress shimmered with colored beadwork, patterns flowing across it like stories woven in silence. Her gaze was gentle, yet there was resolve behind it now. Thorne Kessler slowly removed his hat, his breath catching as if the world had slipped out from under him. The 3 women dismounted in one smooth motion and stepped toward him. No one spoke. For a long moment, the air held nothing but memory, 10 years of distance collapsing into a single heartbeat. Then Halona moved forward. Her voice came steady, clear, her English now strong and certain. "Thorn Kessler, we have been searching for you a long time." He blinked, still trying to believe what he was seeing. I remember you," he managed, voice low. "But how did you even find me?" Bidziel let out a small smile, arms crossing loosely. "Circle people don't forget," she said, "and we don't stop looking for the one who saved our lives." Ayanna stepped in closer, her voice softer but just as sure. "We asked in many places, towns, ranches, trails where people talk." She paused, then smiled faintly. "Then we heard about a lone cowboy, a man who saved an old woman from the Briggs Syndicate. We knew it had to be you, the man who helps without asking for anything in return." Thorn felt heat rise to his face, uncomfortable under their gaze. "I just did what was right," he said quietly. "That's exactly why we're here," Halona replied. The three exchanged a look, silent, understood between them without a single word. Then, one by one, they reached into their saddle packs. What they laid before him took his breath: hand-woven blankets rich with intricate patterns, clay vessels painted with careful hands, necklaces of turquoise and silver that caught the light like fire, soft, tanned hides, bundles of herbs tied in leather, carrying the scent of healing. Each gift more meaningful than the last. Thorn shook his head, stepping back. "No, this is too much. I can't take all this." "It is not too much," Halona said firmly. "You gave us our lives. You returned us to our people, in our ways. A debt like that must be honored." "You don't owe me anything," Thorn replied, voice steady. Bidziel stepped forward, her eyes sharp, but not hard. "Then don't see it as debt," she said. "See it as something we choose." Ayanna came to his other side. "For 10 years, she said gently, "we have carried your memory. The man who risked everything for 3 strangers and asked for nothing." Halona reached out and took his hand. Her touch was warm, real, grounding. "We didn't come only to give thanks," she said softly. "We came to tell you something our hearts have known since that day." The world seemed to tilt under Thorn's feet. "What kind of something?" he asked. The 3 women glanced at each other again, like they had lived this moment 1,000 times already. Then, together their voices rose. But it was Halona who finished it. "We want to marry you, Thorn." Silence crashed down so hard he could hear his own heartbeat. "We each love you, in our own way," she continued. "For years we have carried that feeling. We know your people see things differently. But in our traditions, a man may be chosen by those who come to him with honesty." She held his gaze. "And we have come together." Thorn opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His mind spun, shock, confusion, and something deeper he didn't dare name. Bidziel stepped in, her voice steady, understanding. "We know it's a lot." "We don't expect your answer now," Ayanna added softly. "We only needed you to know the truth." "You saved us," Bidziel said. "And in doing that, you took something with you." "Our hearts," Ayanna whispered. "All 3, Bidziel finished. "You don't have to choose," Ayanna continued. "You don't have to feel bound to us. We just needed you to know. There are 3 women in this world who see you as the most honorable man they have ever known." Thorn looked at them. Really looked. Each one different. Each one carrying strength, grace, and something real. This wasn't tradition. This wasn't obligation. This was truth. "I've lived alone a long time," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "I got used to it, not relying on anyone, not letting anyone rely on me, Because everyone I ever loved, I lost them. Halona's fingers tightened gently around his hand. Being alone feels safe, she said, but it isn't living. Her eyes held his. Love is risk, but it's the only reason to wake up and keep going. A small grin tugged at Bidziel's lips. And you're not as used to being alone as you think, she added. You rode out and saved Dela Crowe just days ago. A man who truly wants nothing to do with people doesn't do that. Thorn let out a quiet breath, and for the first time in a long while. He didn't feel alone. Thorn couldn't help the faint smile that slipped across his face. She was right. Stay, he said suddenly, so fast it surprised even him. Stay a few days. Let me get to know you. Not as the man who pulled you out of danger 10 years ago, but as who I am now. And I want to know you the same way. Not as the girls you were, but the women you've become. For a heartbeat, none of them moved. Then the three women smiled. And in those smiles, Thorn saw it. Hope, warmth, and something close to relief. We'll stay, Halona said gently. Then her expression turned a little more serious. But there's something you need to understand, Thorn. In the end, you will have to choose one of us. In our ways, a woman may come forward, may offer her heart. But marriage, that belongs to two. She glanced at her sisters. We know this. We accept it. And the one you don't choose will still stand beside you. As family, as a sister. Thorn swallowed, the weight of that settling in his chest. I don't want to hurt any of you, he said quietly. Ayanna stepped closer, her voice soft but certain. The truth doesn't wound the way lies do, she said. Just be who you are. The rest will find its place. The days that followed felt unreal, like something borrowed from a life he'd never believed could be his. The ranch changed. Not in its bones, but in its spirit. Halona rose with the sun each morning, tending to the small patch of earth behind the house. She moved through the garden like she belonged to it, identifying wild herbs, planting seeds she had carried all the way from Halona's circle. Under her hands, the dry soil seemed to breathe again. She showed Thorn how to use each plant, how to ease pain, how to close wounds, how to fight fever. And when they spoke, it wasn't rushed, it wasn't shallow, it was quiet, steady. Conversations about the land, about life, about things that didn't need to be said loud to matter. Bidziel was already awake before the first light touched the horizon. She took to the horses like they answered only to her. Even the wildest ones settled under her presence. She didn't just train them, she understood them. Taught Thorn things he'd never learned, ways to move with the animal instead of against it. She was sharp, honest, and when she laughed, it rolled free, like wind sweeping through the high country. Ayanna brought something else entirely. She reshaped the house itself. Curtains she had woven now hung by the windows, catching the light in soft patterns that made the small space feel alive. In the afternoons, she sat near the window, working beads and leather into quiet works of art, telling stories as her hands moved. Stories of her people, old ones. Her voice carried like music, and more than once Thorn found himself slowing his work, just to hear it longer. But beneath it all, he knew. A choice was coming, and it scared him more than anything he'd faced before. On the 5th day, something shifted. Thorn was out by the stable when he noticed it first. The sky. Out west, it had turned a sick yellow shade. Unnatural. Wrong. The horses felt it too. They grew restless, stomping, snorting, their nerves snapping tight. Thorn didn't need a second look. "A storm," he muttered, "and a bad one." He ran for the house. "We gotta move," he called out. "Storm's coming in fast." No one wasted time. Halona was already outside, securing anything that could be torn loose by the wind. Bidziel moved the horses into the main stable, sealing the doors tight behind them. Ayanna shut every window, every crack, stuffing damp cloth into the gaps to keep the dust out. Thorn climbed onto the roof, working fast to secure the loose boards. Then he saw it. Far off, cutting across the open land toward the ranch. A single rider. Small. Too small. Elira Voss. She was pushing her pony hard, racing the storm, but she wasn't going to make it. Behind her, the wall of sand rose like a living thing, roaring, swallowing the horizon. A storm like that didn't just blind you, it buried you. A child wouldn't survive it. Thorn didn't hesitate, not even for a second. Thorn dropped from the roof without a second thought, hit the ground running, and rushed straight for the stable. In one smooth motion, he swung onto his fastest horse. Bidziel saw him and didn't ask questions. "I'm riding with you," she called, already mounting her own horse. "It's too dangerous," Thorn shot back. "Two sets of eyes beat one in a sandstorm," Bidziel answered, voice firm as iron. "Don't waste time. Move!" There was no arguing that. Thorn kicked his horse forward, and they burst out together, riding hard into the rising wind. The storm was already building. Dust devils twisted across the ground, and the air itself felt alive, restless. They didn't have long. Minutes, maybe less. They rode toward where Thorn had last seen Elira. But the world was already starting to disappear. The wind howled louder, tearing at them. Sand stung their skin like 1,000 tiny needles. Thorn pulled his bandana up over his mouth and nose, shouting her name again and again. "Elira! There!" Bidziel yelled suddenly, pointing off to the right. Thorn followed her line, and saw the pony, running wild, circling in panic. But no Elira. His chest tightened hard. She'd fallen. He drove his horse faster, pushing straight into the oncoming wall of sand, now rolling toward them like a living thing. Then he saw her, a small shape on the ground, clinging to a bush while the wind tried to rip her away. Thorn didn't slow. He jumped from the saddle before the horse had fully stopped and ran to her, dropping to his knees. "I got you," he shouted, pulling her into his arms. And then the storm hit, full force. The world turned brown. Gone. He couldn't see more than an arm's length ahead. The roar of the wind swallowed everything. Sound, breath, thought. Out of the chaos, Bidziel appeared beside him, like something carved out of the storm itself. She had caught the pony, holding tight to the reins. She shouted, but the wind tore her words apart. Then she pointed. Down. Thorn followed her gesture. A shallow dip in the land, a natural hollow, shelter. They dropped low, crawling toward it as the storm fought to rip them apart. Thorn wrapped Elira tight against his chest, shielding her as best he could. Sand tore at his back, filled his ears, his mouth, his eyes. Bidziel pressed in close beside them, using her own body to block the worst of it. The three horses crowded in, instinct taking over, huddling together against the storm. And around them, the desert roared, like a beast unleashed. Elira trembled in his arms, crying, her small body shaking. Thorn held her tighter. "You're all right," he shouted close to her ear. "I've got you, I'm not letting go." Time broke apart. Minutes, maybe hours. It didn't matter. There was only the fight to breathe, to stay grounded, to hold on. At some point through the chaos, Thorn felt something. A hand. Bidzeal's hand finding his. She gripped it tight. And somehow, that simple touch steadied him. He wasn't alone. Not in this. Not anymore. Slowly. The storm began to lose its fury. The roar softened. The wind weakened. The sand fell less violently. Thorn cracked his eyes open, just a sliver. The world started to come back. When it was over, they rose slowly, covered head to toe in dust, like statues carved from the earth itself. Elira coughed hard, tears still streaking her face. But she was alive, unhurt. The horses shook themselves, sending clouds of sand into the air. Thorn turned to Bidzeal. She looked back at him. And in that quiet moment, something passed between them. No words, just understanding. A bond forged in survival. Then it hit him. Halona, Ayanna, waiting back at the ranch. Worried. He remembered Halona's hand in his. The quiet strength in her touch. Ayanna's voice, soft, steady, full of life. And suddenly, his heart felt pulled in 3 different directions. They rode back slow, careful. Elira clung to Thorn the entire way. When they reached the ranch, Halona and Ayanna were already running toward them. Halona's eyes filled with tears as she lifted Elira down from the saddle. "I thought we lost you," she whispered, holding her close. Ayanna stepped in next, wrapping her arms around Bidzeal. "Thank you for bringing him back," she said softly. That night, after Elira was safely returned to her family, after the fear had passed and the dust had settled, the 4 of them sat together at the table. No one spoke, but the silence said everything. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean, but something unspoken still lingered between them. Thorn felt it, knew it. The moment he'd been putting off had finally come. "I need to talk to you," he said at last, his voice low but steady. "About what I feel and what I have to do." The 3 women nodded. No fear in their eyes, only quiet understanding. This was it. The hardest thing he'd ever had to face. The fire cracked softly in the hearth, casting a warm, golden glow that flickered across the walls. Outside, the night sky stretched wide and clear, stars burning brighter than usual after the storm. Thorn stood by the window, staring out into that endless sky. Behind him, they waited. Patient. Silent. The weight in the room wasn't heavy with tension, but with truth. He drew in a slow breath, then turned. "All my life," he began, his voice rough with something deep, "I've been building walls. After I lost my family, I learned the hard way that loving someone means risking everything. Losing them nearly broke me once. I didn't think I could survive it again." Halona watched him, her gaze steady, filled with quiet understanding. Bidzeal sat with her hands clasped, her posture strong but calm. Ayanna toyed gently with a bead at her necklace, listening with her whole heart. "But then you 3 came into my life," Thorn continued, "like a storm I never saw coming, and you showed me something I didn't want to admit." He stepped forward and sat across from them, his eyes moving from one face to the next, holding each of them in memory. "That I've only been living half a life. That fear has stolen years from me." He turned first to Bidzeal. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You're like the wind out in the high country," Thorn said quietly. "Wild, free, strong enough to face anything. Out there in that storm, you saved my life." Her jaw tightened slightly, emotion flickering behind her strength. Your spirit's too big for fences, he went on. Too big for this place. No ranch, no home, no man could ever hold you still. She opened her mouth, but he raised a hand gently. Let me finish. His voice softened. You deserve a life that moves, that breathes, that runs wild without chains. And if you stayed here with me, I know one day you'd feel trapped. A long silence. Then Bidzil nodded slowly, her eyes shining now. You're right, she said, her voice steady despite the tears, and I respect you for seeing it. She stepped closer, placing a hand briefly against his arm. You'll always be my brother, Thorn, the bravest man I know. The words hit him harder than he expected, but he turned to Ayanna. She looked up at him, her eyes soft, filled with quiet light. Ayanna, he said gently, you're like the stories you tell. There's beauty in everything you touch, depth, meaning. A faint, knowing smile crossed her lips. You've filled this place with life, with warmth, with something I didn't even realize I was missing. He paused. But you belong to a different world than mine. Her smile didn't fade, but it changed. You need color, music, people who understand what you create. I'm just a rancher, Ayanna. My hands are built for dirt and rains, not for the kind of beauty you carry. She lowered her gaze for a moment, then nodded. I know, she whispered. I've known. A soft breath escaped her lips. But these days, I'll carry them with me always. Thank you, Thorn. Finally. He turned to Helona. She hadn't moved, hadn't looked away once, and something in her eyes made his chest tighten. Helona, he said, his voice catching slightly before he steadied it. From the moment you stepped onto this land, something felt different. He stood and walked toward her. She rose to meet him. It's not the fire of adventure, he said, not the wonder of something new. He stopped in front of her. It's something quieter. He took her hands in his. When I see you out in the garden, I feel peace. When we sit together at night, talking about nothing and everything, I feel like I've finally found a place where I belong. Her breath trembled. In that storm, when I thought I might not make it back, his voice dropped. It was your face I saw, your voice I heard, pulling me home. His fingers tightened slightly around hers. You understand me, without asking. You see the parts of me I've tried to hide, and you don't turn away. A tear slipped down her cheek. And when you look at me, I don't see the past anymore. He stepped closer. I see a future I never believed I deserved. Silence. Then, I love you, Helona. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady, real. The kind of love that grows slow, like roots sinking deep into the earth. The kind that doesn't break. He drew in one last breath. Will you marry me? For a moment, she didn't move. Then the tears came, and she threw her arms around him, holding on like she'd waited a lifetime. Yes, she whispered. Yes. 1,000 times, yes. Yes. I've loved you since the day you risked everything for us, Helona whispered through tears. And that love, it never faded. It only grew stronger with time. Thorn held her close, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them. Then Bidzil and Ayanna stepped forward. No hesitation. No bitterness. Only truth. The four of them came together, arms wrapping around each other in a quiet, powerful embrace. There were tears, but there was laughter too. Acceptance. Something deeper than any one choice. We are sisters, Bidzil said firmly, her voice steady. That doesn't change. She looked at Helona, then at Thorn. She holds your heart, but the three of us, We gained something too. A brother. A family. Ayanna smiled, her eyes soft but bright. That's right, and we'll be back often. One day your children will call me Aunt, and I'll fill their heads with stories they'll never forget. Thorn let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head through the emotion. You're already planning my children? Halona smiled, warm, radiant. A healer always looks ahead, she said gently. The days that followed were filled with movement, purpose, and something new. A future taking shape. Bidzil made her choice first. I'm heading back, she said one morning. I've got trails to follow, lands I haven't seen yet. I'll become what I was meant to be. A tracker, a wanderer, free. Ayanna chose a different path. I've heard of a place, she said, eyes distant with wonder. Santa Fe. They say artists gather there from all over, people who create, who trade stories in color and form. She smiled softly. I want to see it. But both of them gave their word. We'll be back, Bidzil said. For the wedding, Ayanna added. And they kept that promise. A month later, beneath a sky so clear it seemed endless, Thorn Kessler and Halona were married. The ceremony was something rare. Two worlds, meeting in the middle. Traditions of Halona's circle woven together with those of the settlers. Garrick Brigg stood as the one to speak the vows. Elira Voss walked proudly as the flower girl, scattering petals with a grin too big for her face. Bidzil and Ayanna stood beside Halona, not just as witnesses, but as something more. Family. The land filled with life that day. Dustvale folk came from nearby ranches, standing side by side with circle people. There were no lines, no divisions, just people. Just love. Just a moment where everything felt right. That night, when the last lantern dimmed and the voices faded into silence, Thorn and Halona sat together on the porch, hand in hand, looking out at the stars stretching endlessly above them. Are you afraid? Halona asked softly. Thorn let out a slow breath. Yeah, he admitted. More than I've ever been. She turned slightly toward him. But it's different now, he added. This kind of fear, I don't want to run from it, because it means I finally have something worth losing. He looked at her. And that means I'm finally living. Halona rested her head gently against his shoulder. 10 years ago, she whispered, you saved my life. A pause. Tonight, I saved yours. He frowned slightly. How? You pulled me out of death, she said, but I pulled you out of loneliness, out of the walls you built, out of the fear that kept you locked away from the world. Thorn leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Then I guess we're even. They sat there long after that. No words, no need, just two souls who had found their way back to each other across 10 long years. The lone cowboy wasn't alone anymore. And the woman he once saved had become the one who saved him. Sometimes love doesn't come like a storm. It doesn't crash or burn. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like rain in the desert, slow, steady, until one day, life begins to grow where there was nothing but dust, and beneath an endless sky, on a small piece of land carved from hardship and hope, a new life finally began.